Are you finding it hard to concentrate, or is your mind going totally blank when you're trying to remember something? Or maybe you're dwelling in negative self talk and thinking, I'll never pass this exam. I'm not good at taking tests. Or perhaps you're comparing yourself to other people and saying things like, my colleague passed this exam. Why can't I? This series of techniques is designed to help you challenge these negative thoughts and encourage you to find some more positive, helpful ways of thinking about your exam. We'll start by asking you to define your purpose or remember why you chose this profession in the first place. Then we'll try a reframing exercise. And after that, we'll walk you through how to use a thought record. And finally, we'll talk about a concept called state-dependent memory and how this was tested in a study with underwater divers and how you can use this to your advantage on test day. Now, in this first exercise, you'll define your purpose and reason for choosing to be a part of the helping profession. As the days go by and life happens, it's easy to lose sight of the big picture. Studying can seem like drudgery, and watching videos about therapeutic techniques which used to excite you may now seem like something that you just want to check off the list. It's time to remember the why. There's some reason that you chose to be in the helping profession in the first place. Something that compelled you to want to listen to other people's story and help them to live their best lives. I invite you to take a few moments to reflect on that reason. Think about what inspired you, what continues to inspire you to this day on this path. What is that light in the distance which beckons you forward? Well, write this down somewhere visible so that you can see it when you're preparing for your exam and feeling like studying is just something more to cross off the list. Have you attempted to take the exam before but failed? Then this next technique is for you. Failing doesn't feel good. When you set out to accomplish something and you come back empty-handed, it can be frustrating and demoralizing. You may also walk away with a distorted view of your own abilities. You may even feel like a failure. But remember, failing is different than being a failure. To fail means that you tried something and it didn't work. It's a temporary setback. Being a failure, on the other hand, is a mindset where you believe that you will never be successful and you've basically given up. Now, that sounds pretty grim, doesn't it? Well, if you're feeling like a failure, it's important that you understand that you have within yourself the power to change how you perceive this experience by reframing your failed attempt as an advantage versus a disadvantage. But how can you pull off a magic trick like that? Well, much like a magician, you get to play with perception. Anxiety is all about being stuck in the future, worrying about what comes next, and sometimes worrying that the same bad thing, failing, is going to happen again. Did you ever consider that by failing the exam, you now have an advantage of knowing what comes next? Though you didn't see a pass score on the last go-around, all is not lost. You walked away from the exam knowing a little bit more than you did when you started. Think about some of the things that you learned while you were taking your exam. Here are a few examples to get you started. Say the room was cold. I should pack a sweater just in case the room is cold at the next testing center. Or I had a bunch of questions about group therapy on my exam and I wasn't prepared for those. So I'm going to make sure that I study that information just in case it appears on the next exam. Now use all of those new nuggets of information to your advantage this next go around. Why can't I figure this out? I must be stupid. I'm never going to pass this test. Other people will, but I won't. The objective of this next exercise is to identify and change unhelpful and unhealthy thoughts like those. The concept of a thought record comes from Albert Ellis, who developed something called the ABC model. The ABC model was a kind of early thought record that said that consequences or negative feelings and dysfunctional behaviors are not determined by events themselves, but by our beliefs about the events. Thought records have evolved over the years, and there are now several variations of them. The one we're going to walk you through right now has 7 steps. Now, first off, what you'll need to do is create or print out a chart like this one. And now we'll go through the steps involved in filling out the chart. Step 1 involves writing down your feelings. Are you scared, angry, disgusted, shocked, defeated, hopeless, anxious, etc.? Step 2 involves noting behavior and physical sensations that you're experiencing. And now that you've written down how you feel and what you're doing, step 3 is all about figuring out what triggered this reaction. Now, there are a million different events that could trigger anxiety. For example, not passing your exam would definitely count. Now, you may be wondering why we show the trigger in column 1, but you don't have to fill it out until step 3. The trigger is written in the first column because the trigger is what happens first. But it's often difficult to identify this event right away. It gets a little easier after you've examined how you're feeling and behaving. After you have identified the trigger or triggers, step 4 is where you write down the automatic thoughts that are contributing to how you're emotionally responding to the trigger. Here are some examples of thoughts that may be contributing to the emotional response. I'm not smart. I can't make mistakes. Anything less than perfect means that I'm not good enough. Step 5 is where you identify the thinking error. Some of the more common thinking errors are magnifying another person's positive attributes, that is, put them on a pedestal, while minimizing or downplaying your own positive attributes, catastrophizing and losing perspective about the test, using should statements and putting unreasonable demands on yourself, thinking in all or nothing terms. A big clue that all or nothing thinking is at play is when you're using words like always or nothing. Step 6 involves some detective work, where you examine the thoughts to see if they are actually accurate or perhaps faulty and unhealthy. Some questions that might help in this investigation are, can I prove that what I'm thinking is true? What's the evidence that something negative will happen? Would someone I trust think that I'm being realistic? And step 7, the final step, involves a little bit of creativity as you think about alternatives. For every negative thought, what's an alternative, more healthy thought? And what are some things you can do that will help you feel better and reinforce these more healthy, balanced thoughts? Now, if you're having trouble with recall, this next technique of tapping into the state-dependent memory can help you. First, a quick science lesson. When your brain stores a memory, like a study session, it stores it in context with your physiological state, that is, physical sensations like being cold or hot, being jazzed up on caffeine, etc. Your emotional state, how you felt at the time, and the environmental state, the sounds, smells, objects, etc., that were part of that event. These different states are all stored in that memory's folder and act like triggers when you're trying to access that memory itself. You've seen this action if you've ever gotten a whiff of a smell that instantly transports you to a past experience. Maybe you think of that time you baked cookies with Grandma whenever you smell gingerbread, or a certain song reminds you of your childhood. There have been numerous studies of state-dependent memory concept, including one in the 1970s where a group of underwater divers were given a list of words to memorize while underwater. The divers were later asked to recall the items on the list in two settings, while underwater and while on land. They had better recall of the list while underwater, the same setting where they first memorized that list. Now, we are not suggesting that you have your study sessions underwater, but there is something more practical that you can try. Every time you sit down to study, set up a slightly different combination of conditions. For example, in a session, try eating a snack, wearing a sweater, and sitting in a room without any windows, or at least close the curtains. In another session, try playing some music that you enjoy, and wearing a favorite t-shirt and sitting at a table near a window. By studying with slightly different conditions, you'll increase the number of contextual clues that you can rely on to recall the information that you had in your study session. To find out the more effective contextual clues that work for you, you'll need to experiment a little bit. Does the smell of peppermint take you back to that time you studied developmental theory because you were eating a peppermint candy at the time? Great. Then take peppermint candy with you to the exam. Or does that t-shirt you have on remind you of the time you were learning about substance use disorders and spilled coffee all over your shirt? Perfect. Wear that shirt on exam day. These are the kind of cues that you're after. But remember to use the tool wisely. Do not wait until exam day and drag along a trunk full of clothes, food, and fragrances that you used every time you studied in hopes that being around all of that stuff is going to help you recall information. It doesn't really work that way. Remember, a few really effective cues, maybe 3, 4, or 5, and you're on your way to better recall. Remember, it's in there.